Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, those of us that are vigilant today will eat tomorrow. Now let me tell you what I mean. This video is not about food storage, it's not really about prepping, except for one form of prepping, I guess you could say. We live in a world where we are provided with the narrative that the powers that be, whoever they may be, want us to hear. And if we challenge that narrative, we are labeled by crazy names that discredit what we're saying. And I'm not just talking about myself, but I'm talking about anyone. Anyone out there that challenges the official narrative that you are being spoon-fed via the mainstream media, via different governmental sources. If you challenge that narrative, you know that you will be discredited. That if you have a YouTube channel, they'll take you down. That if you have a Facebook page, they'll take it down, etc., etc. Well, one of the most important things that you can do to prepare is to challenge yourself to understand what you are being told, not because you believe who is telling it to you, but because you've done your own research and you spent the time deciding whether what you are being told has any validity to it or not. And why is that important, ladies and gentlemen? Because whether or not you believe the narrative, be it the government's, be it the media's, be it the alternate media narrative, whether or not you believe it, whatever actions you take, they're only going to affect you and your family in the coming months and years. During this lockdown, I've taken a little bit of time to research some things that I've never really thought about. I actually had a conversation with someone a day or so ago who was actually in the Soviet Union. This person was there during the time that the Soviet Union was transitioning, meaning when they went into hyperinflation and their economy and pretty much their country collapsed. And I got some insight from someone that was actually there as to what it was like. So I did a little bit of research. And this person was 100% right in what they were telling me. So I believed this person. I believed this person wholeheartedly when they were explaining this to me. But I did my own research anyways. You know why? Because if I decide to take action, I have to make sure that I myself can validate the information by which I am using to take that action. Because it's not only my... There is really one specific way by which countries and governments, especially governments, control their people. And that is with food. And if you look around there and then you go do your own research and validate that information, then you're going to be better off. Because the better prepared you are today, the better off you'll be tomorrow. And in order for you to decide how to prepare or how well to prepare, you need information. So ladies and gentlemen, do your own research. Now, I put together just a few examples of things that I've researched in the past and just very recently. And these are things that you may have heard about and maybe haven't heard about. Pick one thing a day or pick one thing a week that you have doubts about or that maybe you've heard from a very credible source and you just want to validate it. So like I said, I picked a few things that a lot of people probably don't know about. The Alaska Prepper community is pretty darn smart, so I'm pretty sure that you guys have heard of most of these things. But sometimes these things are not taught. And like I said, some of these things I may have mentioned in the past, but then again, I know that we have a lot of new subscribers. So it may benefit some of our new subscribers to know about some of these things. And like I said, ladies and gentlemen, do your own research. Now, in any of the things that I cover, I'm not trying to make a statement for that one thing. All right, I'm not trying to tell you this is what it is. This is the right answer. And hopefully it will encourage you, like I said, to do a little bit of research on your own, on any subject matter that you find that may have value for you to really know what's at the bottom of it and what the truth is, at least as you understand it. And the first thing that I want to cover is, how many people really know what are the top causes of death in the United States? Just in the US, it doesn't have to be the world. And I was pretty astounded, really, because I didn't know this. I'd researched some things, in particular in the past, but not really just go on the internet and put in what are the top 10 causes of death in the US. And surprisingly, number 1 is heart disease. I didn't know that. I forgot the numbers, but it's quite a large amount. It's more than 500,000 people in the US find their demise because of heart disease. And I believe the second one is cancer. And it goes down and down. And I'll leave it up to you whether you want to know what the other ones are. But one of the top causes of death in the US that many people don't know is medical malpractice. In the US, on average, about 250,000 people lose their lives every year because of medical malpractice. Now, how many of you knew that? A lot of people don't know that. And I'm going to bring up pea shooters, all right? Whenever there's, an incident where several people get hurt or lose their lives because of some maniac that had a dark heart, it comes up and it comes up. We have to take these away. And like I said, I'm not making a statement as to where I stand. I stand for freedom, all right? But it's neither here nor there for this conversation. But the reason I'm bringing that up is pea shooters are involved, or people using pea shooters are the cause of about 35 or so thousand, 32,000 deaths per year. And most of those are because of people taking their own lives. And then some of those are accidental. Some of those are criminal. What I'm getting at is that why don't they mention heart disease in the news? Why are there not marches on the streets and protests against the things that cause heart disease? Why are there not marches and protests on the streets to protest those things that cause cancer? Why are there not marches and protests to protest medical malpractice, or all of the lives that are lost due to the wrong prescriptions being given out, or people overdosing on opioids? That's where I'm getting at, ladies and gentlemen. Now that you have the time, do a little bit of research, not necessarily into this one subject matter. I'm going to cover a whole bunch of other subject matters that you may decide to do a little research on yourselves. But I ask myself, why is the media so concerned about this one thing that causes about 1/20th the amount of fatalities that heart disease causes. Same thing as cancer. It causes about 1/8 of the amount of fatalities that medical malpractice causes. That's one thing that I've researched during this time that we've had where we can spend more time at home. And here's a couple other things that I researched. How did the hyperinflationary event that occurred in Germany, back, it was between World War I and World War II. I think it was in the 20s or something like that. Remember, everyone hears about this Weimar Republic in Germany where they had hyperinflation. The shoeshine kid that worked in front of a hotel got a 1 gold coin tip, and later on he came back and bought the hotel with that gold coin. It's one of the tales that you hear a lot. I don't know if that's true or not. But how many people have been actually taught in school what caused that hyperinflation? What courses of events took place prior to hyperinflation occurring? Because if we study these things, ladies and gentlemen, if we do a little bit of research back in history and look at that, we can then learn from their mistakes and see if the time in which we are living today have any correlations whatsoever with what happened in the past. That's why I believe that history, if studied the right way and not cherry-picked, it's very important to know. As everyone knows and everyone's probably heard, history never repeats itself, but it quite often rhymes. And it's pretty true because human beings have a cycle. And usually after about 80 or 90 years, all of those people that experienced the things back then are gone. And they're no longer here to warn those of us that refused to learn from them while they were still here. So what was the premise by which Germany, back in the 20s, got into that problem with hyperinflation? Well, if you do a little bit of research, just a little bit, like today, I probably spent 5 minutes on Germany. They were taking on an extreme amount of debt in order to build up their military and in order to pump up the social programs that they had in their nation. And when I read that, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that Germany had hyperinflation. I would say that most of us do. I don't know if they still teach it in school or not, but I would say that most of us do know that, yeah, Germany had hyperinflation. You needed a wheelbarrow of bills in order to buy a loaf of bread, all that stuff. But why? What happened? What got them there? Well, in reading just for a few minutes today, I found out that the reason, or some of the reasons why they ended up going into hyperinflation and destroying their monetary system, which ended up in them, you know what happened after that, right? With all the horrific things that happened in Germany during that time, was because they were spending a lot of money that was fiat currency. It wasn't even money. It was fiat currency. They were printing it into oblivion in order to support their military expenditures and in order to support their social programs. And I told myself, that sounds very familiar. I'll let you decide for yourselves whether it sounds familiar to you or not. This staying at home thing, it could benefit the masses in one way that I haven't really thought about in depth. I think I mentioned it a while back, several videos back, where I said that now that people are staying at home because they're pretty much forced to stay at home in some places, they have a great opportunity to start educating themselves on those things that prior to this happening, they didn't really have time to research. And in a way, it could be a great awakening, not only for our nation, but for the world. Does anyone know why it is that Franklin D. Roosevelt decided to do a gold confiscation? And technically, it wasn't a gold confiscation. It was a gold buyback, but it was through executive order and with a punishment of, I believe it was $5,000 or 10 years in jail. I could be wrong on those numbers, but it was something along those lines if you didn't turn in your gold for Federal Reserve notes at that time. A lot of people don't know why he did that. A lot of people think that FDR was the greatest president that there ever was because he brought the people out of the Great Depression. But many people don't understand why it is that he confiscated the gold from the American people, taking one of the first steps, really taking the second step into getting us to where we are now, where we are in a full fiat currency, just like Germany was, full fiat currency, where we're printing it out of thin air. Many people don't know why he did that. Well, I really would like you to do your own research on this, but I'll give you a little bit of background. This is what I've learned. During FDR's time, there were two currencies circulating. Now understand this, ladies and gentlemen. A currency can be backed and not backed. You have a currency which is a vehicle for money to be exchanged. So for example, during FDR's time, the treasury note was a currency. It was a currency that represented an exact amount of gold. So for every, for example, $20 bill that was in circulation, that were treasury notes of $20, existed a 1 ounce gold coin in the treasury. All right, so during that time, the treasury notes that were in circulation were 100% backed by gold. But at that time, also existed the Federal Reserve note that was being put out by the Federal Reserve. Remember, this is in the 30s. So the Federal Reserve was already around. There were already Federal Reserve notes floating around. And those Federal Reserve notes supposedly were supposed to also be backed up by gold. Well, the problem was they were not. During that time, there was the equivalent amount of Federal Reserve notes in circulation to equate to roughly 20,000 tons of gold. During a time in our history where only about 18,000 tons of gold existed in the entire world. So there were more Federal Reserve notes floating around throughout the U.S. and the world, if there were any outside the U.S., than existed in gold. And they were supposed to be backed up by gold, but none of them were. The Federal Reserve notes were backed up with zero gold, even though it said on there that they were. Well, every single treasury note that was out in circulation was backed by gold. And there was the equivalent of treasury notes to about 6,000 tons of gold that was actually held in physical form by the Treasury. Well, knowing that if the news got out that the Federal Reserve note was backed by zero, people would start to trade them in for Treasury notes. And if that happened, it would have collapsed the financial system. So what did FDR do? He went ahead and confiscated the gold. He took in all of the gold that was outside of the Treasury and added it to the 6 ton of gold that the Treasury already held, which came out to roughly 8,000 tons. Once he confiscated the gold, he also mandated that Treasury notes would no longer be usable. So people either had to trade in their treasury notes to the Federal Reserve for a Federal Reserve note or lose their purchasing power, meaning their treasury notes would be no good, right? They had to use them up by a certain time or they would be no good, which left them with only Federal Reserve notes. Once that was accomplished, FDR took the approximate 8,000 tons of gold that was being held at the Treasury and transferred ownership of it to the Federal Reserve. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if anyone knows what the Bretton Woods system is, it was the system that we took on after World War II, where the U.S. Federal Reserve note was backed by 40% gold. Now, why is 40% so very interesting? Because remember what I told you, Federal Reserve had the equivalent of about 20,000 tons of gold in Federal Reserve notes floating around. Now, if you take 8,000 tons and divide it by 20,000 tons, it comes out to be 40%. So what FDR did was he bailed out the Federal Reserve by confiscating the money of the people. That's something else that I've learned. And the last thing I'm going to cover, ladies and gentlemen, because I really don't want to make this a very long video, because the thought behind this video is that you choose some things on your own to go out there and research and learn more about them, especially now that you have a little bit of time. And if you learn something new that you didn't know, share it with people that you know. That way they can become aware. How many people know what the word democide means? I think I've covered this before as well. Probably when I first started the Alaska Prepper News channel. The Alaska Prepper channel. I think I covered this in Alaska Prepper channel. Probably well over a year ago. But how many of you know what democide is? And if you do, ask your children if they are taught what democide is, like in high school. I would assume it would be in high school if they were taught that at all. I don't think they do, but if they do, it would be interesting to know that they do. So before I tell you what democide is, let me tell you first what occurs in democide. What occurs with democide, the end state in democide, is the demise of human life, the taking of human life. In the 20th century, there have been more than 262 million people that have lost their lives to democide. More people than all of the people that have lost their lives in all of our wars. Now, what is democide? Well, ladies and gentlemen, democide is when a government turns on its own people and decides that they don't need to be around anymore and uses its power to take the lives of its own citizens. Now, some very simple examples that, are easy to follow because you've probably already heard this are, of course, in Germany. Everybody knows it's taught in schools, I believe, still in Germany. Millions of lives were lost. Why were they lost? Because their government decided that a certain kind of race and or people that were in certain political groups and or people that just did not agree with what their government agreed with lost their lives. Look back to China. In China, I believe it's estimated that in the 20th century, about 80 million people lost their lives to democide, mostly through starvation. Look back at the Soviet Union during the Lenin era, where again, an estimate of 20 to 30 million people, I believe, lost their lives by democide due to mostly starvation. There are several examples. Cambodia, I believe there was like 1.8 million And we can go on, ladies and gentlemen. There's studies out there on democide and how many people have lost their lives due to democide. But still, people clamor onto government. And people want to give government total power. And yet, government has been the deadliest thing that has happened to humanity in the last century or so. That's interesting, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? I believe it's called Stockholm Syndrome. When someone has full power and control over you, and there's nothing that you can do or are willing to do about it, you soon enough become immune to what's happening to you. As long as you can get your bread and circus, everything's okay. So these are just a few examples, ladies and gentlemen. Please go ahead. If you want to research those, what I just talked about, by all means do. But I encourage you to research some things that are dear to your heart, that maybe you've heard, that maybe sound like it's a little too good to be true. For example, I've heard a lot of people talking on both sides of what's going on right now. You know, that health issue that's going on right now. I've heard many people talk on both sides. Some people say this is nothing but a hoax. Some people say, no, this is really, really real. You really have to be careful. And both sides that I've heard, the argument that I've heard from both sides, are from people that are extremely credible. Well, how do you know what to believe nowadays? That's why it is up to you, ladies and gentlemen, to research things on your own. Because if you believe A or you believe B, it doesn't matter. Whoever you believe, it doesn't matter. You know what really matters? What matters is that it is you who will pay the price for what you believe. That is what matters. What matters is that you have to understand that what you believe will result in what price you pay. And how do you know who to believe? Well, sometimes I myself don't know. That's not really a question that I even can answer to myself. But you have to do the best that you can do. That's why you always hear me say, do your own research. Do your own research, because it's very easy for anyone to listen to something and then want to believe it because they don't want to put the work into convincing themselves that yes, this is true, or no, this is not true. And it is even easier to just believe it and go on. And then whatever happens, happens. That's even easier. But ladies and gentlemen, if you are responsible for yourselves, if you are responsible for your actions, and more importantly, if you are responsible for the well-being of your family, then do your own research. That way, when you make a decision that will impact the way that your family and you live, you will know that you made that decision with the best information that you could get, not just from information that you got from anywhere or that you heard. So I'm going to leave it at that, ladies and gentlemen. This was probably a pretty long video of just me telling you guys to do your own research. So I hope that those of you that hung in there through this video, which probably started getting me a little bored as well, I hope that you will consider looking at different options when you hear something. Go and listen to platforms that you are not in line with. And this is not a political thing, but I'm going to go ahead and use this because it's very easy to understand. But if you consider yourself, or if you label yourself to be on the right, listen to what the left has to say and research it. Same thing. if you are the kind of person that labels yourself as being on the left, listen to what the people on the right are saying and do your own research. That way you can understand both sides. But don't just be anchored in one ideology because it's the way it's always been. You know, I saw a video, I think it was today. There's a great YouTube channel, by the way. It's called Valuetainment. Right? I'll try to remember to leave a link for it. Valuetainment. Great channel. The host, his name is Patrick, and he does interviews, but he does Class A interviews. Outstanding. He is an ex Special Forces medic. When he was in the Army, he was in Special Forces, and he was a medic within the Special Forces. Guy is a really great guy. I believe he's from Iran. He immigrated here from Iran, and then, he joined the military, etc. Now he does this, and he is a great interviewer. And I remember him saying something that went like, yeah, when I grew up, my family were in this political party. And, my parents' were in this political party, and my parents were in that same political party just because that's the way it was. And then my brothers and sisters are in the same political party, and I was in that same political party just because that's the way it's always been. We never really had another choice. That's what we've always done. And then he said, I decided to go ahead and learn about all sides. And then I decided for myself what party I should be in. Now, I'm not promoting politics whatsoever. I'm not promoting that at all. But it was just an example to show you that only because things have always been a certain way doesn't mean that it's the right thing, that it's the right way. Only because that's all you've ever known. So expand your horizons. Use that little thing called Google. Now that I agree with Google, DuckDuckGo, I forgot the name of a few other ones, but use whatever platform you wish to use as far as a search engine goes. But do some research, ladies and gentlemen. Don't just use this time to, do things that are not 100% productive, I guess you could say, because anything is productive as long as you enjoy doing it or want to do it. That is productive. For example, 2 or 3 times a week after I get out of work, you know what I do, ladies and gentlemen? I don't think I've ever said this before. But I play one video game and one video game only. It's the only video game I've played probably for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And that's Call of Duty Zombies. The ones where you get to shoot zombies and you go one level and you get up to level whatever. I think the best I've ever done on my own was like level 30, which is really hard to do. But I like that game. You know why? Because it lets me blow off a little steam. It lets me go into a vegetative state where I'm in a screen and I'm shooting zombies and I'm having fun, and I get to look at my stats at the end of the game and I'm like, oh, I almost beat my old high, et cetera, et cetera. It's just something that's fun for me. It's entertaining. I don't spend all my time doing that. I spend maybe a couple of hours a week doing that because it's fun. So to me, that is productive because I'm blowing off a little bit of steam and I'm having a little bit of fun doing it. Right? So find your own things that you want to do that are fun as well. Don't spend all your time researching. Don't become obsessed with it. But try to understand what it is that you're being told instead of believing it right away. All right, ladies and gentlemen, having said that, thank you very much for hanging in there. Listen, for those of you that hung in there, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a quick picture of how my arrow garden is doing. All right, that's your prize. That's your prize for making it this far. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed the drive. Remember to be good to each other. When good people do good things happen. Remember to reach one, teach one, and repeat. If we all did this, the world would be a better place, and you know that it will be a better place. Many blessings to all of you and your families. This is Alaska Prepper, and I am out.